Hello lovely people, welcome to my channel. It's Hila here, Saturday Night Station. Today's video we're going to be making some shorts out of October Design Kids magazine, which is one of my favorite children's magazines to sew from. So very briefly, October Design Kids magazine is published 4 times a year, and it is published in several different translations which you can order from the October website. Now it's important to note that the patterns do not include any seam allowances unless stated in the instructions. So it's always advisable, no matter how experienced you are as a seamstress, to read through the instructions at least once in order to check if there's anywhere where the seam allowances have been added onto. So without further ado, let's jump straight into making these shorts from the summer issue. Once the pattern pieces have been traced out, you need to add the seam allowances and cut them out. So as we can see, we have the instructions that show us, and it's highly recommended that you read through the instructions first, as already mentioned. The picture gives you an idea of the proportions you can expect to find. I personally prefer using 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter seam allowances. So the first thing is we're going to do the pocket piece and sew it on to the wrong side, and then we're going to finish the seam. I've decided to use a pinking shears because I'm using a wax print fabric, which is very nice and lightweight. And we're going to do some understitching. Now, when I started sewing and I was a beginner seamstress, I used to think understitching is a waste of time. Do not skip this. And for any advanced or intermediate seamstresses, I think you can, mention in the comments box whether this is such an important step. But what it basically does is it creates this really nice, lovely finish. And as you can see there, when we press the pocket piece on to the wrong side of the fabric, that is got the turn of cloth, and you can hardly see the patterned print that I've chosen to use on the inside. And then we're just going to do some top stitching. So throughout this sewing pattern, doing some top stitching, it just adds a really nice finish to it. I mean, it's not necessary, but I just thought that it added quite a nice finish. And so we've got the pocket piece now that we have to sew on to that inner pocket piece that we did. So first of all, we're just going to pin it on and sew down the curve. The nice thing is that these pocket pattern pieces are really nice and big, so very useful. And there again, I'm finishing off with the pinking shears. You can use an overlocker or a zigzag stitch, it's perfectly appropriate. And once the hip yoke pocket has been sewn on, we need to baste it down along the waist edge and along the side seam edge, just so that it doesn't move around. And it's already beginning to take shape. The next thing is to do the pocket pattern pieces. I generally will prepare both the pattern pieces in one go because it just makes life easier. And so I'll just press everything underneath and then just do one top stitching seam on the side that's going to go onto the top. So you can skip the pockets if you want to, but I wanted to add them because pockets are everything. And how I mark the pocket placement is I will use pins to poke through the pattern paper, and then I use my friction heat erasable pens to mark where it's supposed to go. And these pens were such a game changer for me because they're so easy to use, so quick and fast, and just a blast of steam will remove them. And so you pin the pocket pieces on, and then just going to top stitch all the way around and get it sewed on. And I think it coincidentally worked out quite nicely that the contrast of the different parts of this fabric that I was using made it seem as if I was using actually different fabric, but it's just because I cut certain parts off of different bits. So we're going to take the front and the back pattern pieces, which now each have a pocket, and we're going to sew the side seam and the inner leg seam. And once those are sewn, again, we're just going to finish them either with the overlocker or with your pinking shears, as I'm doing here. And then we're going to press, and because these are shorts and they're kids shorts, it's easier to use a tailor's sleeve roll for this. I just found that it worked a lot better, and I'm pressing mine to the back, the seam allowance is to the back, and then I'm just going to top stitch on there. So with children's shorts, it is so important to top stitch because not only is it decorative, but it also reinforces the seams. Now we move on to the crotch seam. So we're just going to line up the pattern pieces together along the crotch seam, and then we're going to sew round that crotch seam, and then we're going to reinforce the crotch seam that's near the inner leg seam, so that that's the bit that works the most, and you need to reinforce it, otherwise you'll have a lot of holes on it. The pattern has got a full fly front, which is good because fly fronts are quite annoying to sew up. So you're going to press that to the left or right depending on whether you're sewing for boys or for girls. We'll be top stitching from the back seam. I find it's a lot easier to do it from the top of the waist seam at the back, and we're going to go all the way down to just about exactly where the full fly front section begins, and so that's what it looks like on there. And it's so important to reinforce this part of the crotch seam. Again, it gets so much use, and if it isn't, it's the part that easily gets torn or ripped apart. And then you just top stitch down that full fly front and give it a nice press, and you've got something that looks really lovely. And whilst we're here, we are going to finish off the hems as well, and these are just simple straightforward hems. I used a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance or hem allowance and give it a press. So now we have to move on to doing the waistband, and it's nearly done. As you can see there, you have the waistband, and what you need to do is to sew the center back seams together, press them open. You don't really need to finish the seam on this one, it will be fine. And then we are going to fold it in half lengthways, because how you're going to insert the elastic on this is that the elastic casing is inserted as you are sewing the waistband down. So once it's been folded down there, if you've got a thicker fabric, you might want to grade your seam where it's going to be sewn. You're going to grab your young person, your little person, and you are going to measure out how you want the elastic to be. I find that this is the most accurate way of doing it. I find that if I measure them using a tape measure and then I go and measure the elastic, it doesn't quite work as well, because when I do it this way, they can tell me whether the tension is too much or too little until you get it just right. And so for me, I'll just cut that out. I'm making 4 at the same time, that's why I've got 4 elastics on there. When you cut it out, make sure to add in the overlap. I prefer to do at least a 1-inch overlap so that I can do that square, which means that everything is nice and taut and it does not come apart. I used to be silly back in the day when I used to try and tie them and used to try and take shortcuts. It is not worth it. So basically, we're going to insert the elastic now into the waistband before we've sewn it, and you can use the Ford's principle, that is to divide the elastic into quarters and then pin it, or in my case I prefer to use wonder clips and then use wonder clips as anchors on the quarter points. And you want the overlap for the elastic to line up with the overlap for the center back seam. So it seems a little bit fiddly, but once you've done it, take your time with it. Once you've done it the first time, after that is one of those things that immediately will then click into place, and you'll never really want to do your elastic bands another way. So I'm using a 25mm elastic, which I think is an inch wide, which I think is just right and comfortable, particularly for summer sewing projects for the children. So we're going to take the shorts themselves now, and then we're going to line up using again the same quarters principle, whereby you use the center front and the center back as your 2 half points, and then the halfway points between the center front and the center back are what you use as your side seam points. And those are all that you really need. And as you're sewing it, you're going to stretch out the elastic, because the waistband seam fits exactly along the short seam. So, but with the elastic inside, it looks like it's shorter, but it isn't. So you just have to be stretching out the elastic as you're sewing and making sure that there aren't any puckers between the waistband fabric and the shorts fabric. And as you can see there, it's been sewn up, but if you stretch it out, it's all perfectly flat. So I decided to finish it with an overlocker for that edge so that I could top stitch it down. So again, top stitching is everywhere, but it does add a level of neatness and it does give a level of comfort. And so there we have a pair of shorts. You can stop here if you want to, but I generally find that the elastics perform a lot better when you anchor them down so that there isn't any twisting that may happen in the wash, and you do that just by stitching in the ditch. Or another option, if you want to, is to actually top stitch over the elastic as you've stretched it out so that it creates this look of 3 tiers of elastic. And there we have these really lovely shorts. Again, Ottobre design has not disappointed. They really are fabulous when it comes to making patterns for the kids, and here the kids were so happy because they didn't have any shorts and I'd promised to make them some shorts. So I made 4 of these shorts in about 2 hours. So it's a really quick pattern, and that's with me adding details like top stitching. And then I had made another pair in this other wax print fabric, which was blue and white, for my son as well, with the pockets, and they came together quickly. I hope that you've enjoyed this video, that you found it useful, informative and entertaining, and if you did, please do give the video a big thumbs up. If you haven't already, do subscribe. It really supports the channel and I appreciate it. And until I see you next time, lovely people, happy sewing. Bye.